And Nikhil, climax of that movie was very unexpected. I would like to watch that movie once again.
That is true, but I couldn't help but notice that people were speaking different English.
Hey, I'm looking for an investor center.
Hey, you want to invest?
No, investor center. I'm looking for investor center.
Yeah, that's us. Hey, no, this is it. This is it.
Oh,
I'm Dwayne.
you're Dwayne?
Yeah.
Hi, Dwayne. We spoke on the phone. I'm Jordan Belfort. I'm the broker from Rothschild from New York.
Yes, yeah, have a seat. How are you?
Remember, we had a
We spoke
conversation
on the phone earlier, right?
2 hours ago. Right.
Yeah.
Hello, Bhagya, not the stock. Of course you never heard of them. They're up and comers. That's what that means. We've heard of them. No longer.
It's $3.
That's true. That was something that I also felt. In fact, a lot of my friends have that same confusion. If there is a right model to follow in speaking English.
Well, we have with us Dr. Lal, so why don't we just walk up to him?
And let's see if there is a right model at all.
Hello, Nikhil. Hello, Sreejitha. Talking about a right model of English, we often have a tendency to think that English is a fixed kind of thing. People often talk about following the BBC English as a good model. But the fact is, today in the modern world, English has many, many varieties. So the condition is such that some experts talk of Englishes. We say that English is no longer one language, but there are many Englishes. Well, that may be an extreme way of saying it, but English has many varieties. We often hear people talk about Australian English, American English, Indian English, etc. And that itself makes it clear that there are many different kinds of English. Well, in fact, it's not about English only. Our language, Malayalam, also has many different varieties, doesn't it? Have you noticed that people in different parts of Kerala speak Malayalam in different ways? So, in the same way, English is also spoken differently in different parts of the world, and even within one country, English may be spoken in different ways. So, the movie you saw, probably it is an American movie, but inside America, there are many, many states. So, in fact, America is a huge country with 5 time zones, and there are many different ways of English heard in different parts of America. Even though we talk about American English, there is no such thing as a fixed American English. There are many differences within America. In each region, they have a regional way of speaking English. We call that a dialect of the American variety of English.
So, sir, as you said, there are different varieties of English. So, can you elaborate more with a few examples, maybe?
Maybe I start with the varieties of Malayalam. We have a popular mimic and a film star named Suraj Vanyaramudu.
Yes.
He is supposed to imitate the Trivandrum Malayalam. But the fact is, he imitates only the Trivandrum Malayalam that is spoken in a particular part of Trivandrum. And Trivandrum district, which is relatively small when we consider the big state of Kerala, there are so many other varieties of Malayalam that is heard. So in the same way, inside a big country where English is spoken, there are hundreds of varieties in fact. For example, inside India itself, English is spoken as a linked language, and even English is our official language too. They'll give you an example of the word girl. Maybe if you impose a standard way of pronouncing girl would be girl. Inside India, people in different states of India would tend to say it differently. For example, there are people who would say girl or girl. And inside Kerala, we tend to say girl, for example. But that is about a foreign language, a foreign word that is spoken inside India with people speaking different languages. Even within England, you would notice that people speak differently. For example, the word home, H-O-M-E, we would pronounce it as home. In some parts of England, they would pronounce it as home. Some would pronounce it as home. And there are people who pronounce it as Heim. So even within England, you have different varieties. So it's very unwise to say I am speaking British English, because British English itself is a problematic term. Then that is about pronunciation. About other features, for example, spelling. Americans would spell the word program with one M, while the British people would write it with M-M-E, P-R-O-G-R-A-M-M-E. The pronunciation is more or less the same. And what the British people call petrol, the Americans would call gasoline. So, because we have this British tradition, we would say, I'm going to put petrol into my car. Whereas an American would say, I want to put gas into my car. So gas is a short form for gasoline. So you see the varieties in different languages. And also, we often travel in auto rickshaws in our country. And people who travel extensively sometimes would tend to call these machines that we travel in as tuk-tuk. British friends who have visited Malaysia, I've heard them refer to auto rickshaw only as tuk-tuk. So after a few days in Kerala, they will begin to call it auto rickshaw. So you have the same object, you have two different words. And tuk-tuk is not English. Again, probably it's an imitation of the sound that the auto rickshaw makes, which is heard in Malaysia and countries like that. So the idea is that there is a lot of variety in languages all over the world. Within a language, there are different varieties, and there are differences between different languages spoken inside the same country even. So it's very natural for these varieties to be there. So in the movie you saw, you heard people talk different varieties of English. It's a natural thing. So the question of standard is very tricky. The question you asked me was, what would be the standard variety of English? What would be the correct form of English? It's very difficult to talk about a correct form of English because every language has different varieties. It will be as difficult as trying to say which is the correct form of Malayalam. We speak Malayalam in different parts of the state of Kerala, but we have different forms. A person living in Trivandrum, in the rural area, may not understand many of the things they hear spoken. Even in Ernakulam district or when we travel further north, the difficulty level will increase. Even though the educated speakers will understand each other more or less well. So this is what I was talking about, language varieties.
Sir, as you were talking about varieties, how do you think these varieties develop?
Well, I would say there are two possibilities, basically, where a variety of language form. In ancient times, for example, you will be curious to know how new languages formed. So when a group of people who speak one language live in an area, and a little part of them move away and settle in another part of the world, and they don't have contact with each other, their language will develop in different ways. And these two languages in course of time might become two different languages entirely. Just as Tamil and Malayalam are related, but they are today two entirely different languages. So the distance and lack of communication between the two groups will lead to the formation of two different languages. But that no longer happens today because of communication and because distances are less now. People interact so much. New languages, it's very rare to happen. It may not happen at all, so far as we have this kind of technology and ways of travel. But variety is still there. For example, from a group of people from Kerala, maybe a couple of engineering graduates move to Canada and they settle there. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, their way of speaking will change. Their Malayalam will change, their English also will change. So the distance from the source is one way in which this variety forms. Another way is we go to another country, or in the country we borrow another language. For example, we begin to speak English. And English is a language of another cultural community, but we take that language to our cultural community. Language is very closely related to culture. And then there will be many things we will want to say in English which is not there in England or in America. For example, we have puttu for breakfast. We have dosha for breakfast. And we have kochanga or machanga, which is the young one of a coconut. And these do not have English equivalents. And we don't have to really worry about it. We have two options. One, we look for a new English word, or we use our word, we fit our word into English. So I had puttu today. So puttu becomes part of our English. So this often happens. That's because language is very closely related to culture. Language is very closely related to our life. Even when we are using a different language, we will be wanting to say things about our lives in it. And that is how these varieties happen. So distance is one thing, and then we want to bring in our life into that language, and the changes happen. But as we all know, there is also this aspect called mother tongue influence, which is a perfectly natural thing. Because when we start learning a new language, we have already firmed up our mother tongue. And the influence will always be there. The new language we learn will be based on the language we have already learned. So that influence will always be there. However we try to get rid of it, it will not go away. The only way to speak English like an Englishman is to be born and brought up in England, which is not possible anymore. So when we try to study English after completing our mother tongue, which is Malayalam, these varieties will always be there. And we will have our own variety of English too.
So, Dr. Lal, as we were talking, there are different varieties of English.
Yes.
So is it actually fine to use any of the varieties as we want?
Well, we'll come to that issue. Shall we have some tea now?
That would be nice. Oh, these cookies are really good.
Cookies? We call them biscuits too, right?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Happy that you brought in those two words, Sreejitha and Nikhil. See, cookies and biscuits, again, many people call the same thing by two different names. In different parts of the world, people call them differently. Perhaps in India, we are used to calling them biscuits, but recently we have begun to call them cookies as well. But there is some difference. In some parts of the world, they keep a difference, somewhere they do not, but still these two words are there. So this is a very good example for language varieties. Now we come to your question about which is the acceptable model, which is a variety that we should follow, or is it okay to follow any variety? That was the question you asked.
Yes.
Well, I would address this question with the following explanation. It is okay to follow any variety. All these varieties are equally important. So if you decide you're going to follow the American variety, you can do that. If you decide you're going to follow the British variety, it is okay. But the only standard that we need to keep in mind, English is not our mother tongue. So we are never going to speak like an American. We are never going to speak like a British person. Our mother tongue will keep on coming in. Our culture will keep on coming in. And we will need to bring in many words from our own language. The two facts that we need to keep in mind when we talk English is one, intelligibility, the other, acceptability. Well, let me explain these. So even if you speak English with Malayalam influence, which is okay, which will always happen. Even if your grammar is a bit influenced by Malayalam structures, even if you bring in Malayalam words, even if you bring in Malayalam pronunciation occasionally, it is generally okay so far as your friends or the people you talk to are able to understand your language. It is okay, partly. That is intelligibility. But there is another aspect to it. People generally misunderstand statements like it is okay to speak your English. But there is also this problem with acceptability. Because your variety of English, living in Trivandrum or Ernakulam, your variety of English is often understood by your peers. But your English may not be understood by a person who comes from Gujarat or another part of India. There, this problem of intelligibility is there. Beyond that, acceptability, by what I mean this term in this context, is that people accept you by the way you bear yourself, particularly in social context, in a job environment, when you go for an interview, or you interact with peers in a job outside India or outside Kerala. People judge you by the way you dress yourself and the way you speak English or whichever language. Now here we are talking about English. So your English should have a level of elegance so that you are accepted in international platforms. So that is where this issue comes in. Issue of which model to follow. It's okay to follow a model, but let's keep an eye on making our language intelligible and acceptable. And how do we do that? That is a question I can see in your eyes. Let me conclude with that explanation. The best way is not to go after any particular model. As you rightly said, in the movies that we watch, in the television programs that we watch, in the music that we listen to, English ones I mean, there is a lot of variety. I would say listen and enjoy them all with an open mind. Expose yourself to all different varieties and also focus on your reading. Read as much as you can. Your listening is there, you read as much as you can. Whenever you're able to do some writing and also use English in your speech. When you do this naturally, read a lot, listen a lot, write as much as you can, maybe keep a diary and write something every day, and talk to your friends as much as you can. You will evolve your own English, which is intelligible to others, which also will be acceptable. So that would be my strong recommendation for you to develop your careers and fall in love with the language, fall in love with the music that you listen to, enjoy it, and language should be learned like that. It's not something artificial. You need to enjoy what you do.
So we understand that there is no one such standard form of English, but there exists a lot of varieties to it.
So we'll keep this in mind, and in fact, we'll work on it, practice reading, writing, and in fact, enjoy listening to all these varieties. So thank you, Dr. Lal.
You're welcome.
So we hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Sure, I too love talking to you. So let's say bye now. I have a bus to catch. See you soon.